Welcome to Bigger Than the Game with Deremy and Jose. I'm Deremy Dove. I'm joined by the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Jose Ruiz. What's going on, man?
What's going on, Deremy, man? How you doing, bro?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. And, we haven't done something in a while where we, gave a list of something.
Yeah,
And, you and I were talking off air, like trying to plan for upcoming episodes. And, you got excited about getting back into the list. And this is a topic that I always find real fascinating. And I know you do too. But I love every year, especially, we're looking focused on the NFL when you
hmm
get those worst to first, those turnarounds. And a
it always
team,
happens.
it always happens, right? And those teams that you don't expect. And it's fun to see, right? Like, okay,
Yeah,
they kind of have that, underdog kind of feel or whatever. And we're going to look at our top five NFL 1 year turnarounds. So when we talk about 1 year, because what made me think about this is the Detroit Lions right now
yes, yes,
doing great, and I told somebody the other day, if they win the Super Bowl or even get to the Super Bowl, this is a story they're going to have books, documentaries. You're going to see Dan Campbell and
yeah,
Brad Holmes speaking at like Fortune 500 companies about how to like turn around a culture because of just where the Lions were. But they don't qualify for like the 1 year turnaround necessarily. You know what I mean, Jose? It's different.
right. It is a little different. It's taken them a couple years to get where they're at today, which is a great spot. Great roster, great coaching staff. All around. You know what I mean? Like, and it's really fun to watch. And I know, I got my Eagles stuff on, and we're big Eagles fans, and but if the Eagles don't make it, I would root for Detroit. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, cause that's a great city, great sports city. And, they never won a Super Bowl there. You know what I mean? Like, so it would be fun to watch something like that. And, but yeah, like those turnarounds are always fun. I feel like there's like different kinds also.
Yeah.
You have that one team where, they have a bunch of veterans and stuff just they stay healthy, stuff works out, and then boom, they're going from 4-12 or whatever it is now, but and they just win like five more games or whatever the case. Then you have like that young team who starts to figure it out, and they get better the next year. So I always, like you said, it's always intriguing to see like those turnarounds because you look at the schedule every year and you're like, all right, this is going to be a tough schedule, but then in my mind I'm like, wait, two of these really good teams are not going to be that good. You know what I mean? Like, and then
Mm-hmm.
there's going to be two of these bad teams that are going to be pretty good. Who is it going to be? And that's why when people do their schedule, and I'm like, man, look, I don't even know, man. Talk to me in week 6, like, you know what I
Pretty
mean?
much
Like,
like, yeah.
and we can figure it out then.
No, no, but it is because it's fascinating. There's a lot of different parameters for the turnaround. And
Right.
so I wanted to get because Detroit presently is a good example. I feel like the Jimmy Johnson Cowboys are like the same, where they turned it around. It's a great story. That's why they're still talked about, those '90s Cowboys, what Jerry and Jimmy did. But I don't think they would. I don't know your list, and Jose doesn't know my list. But I feel comfortable that they're not going to be on the 1 year turnaround list because they kind of had. It was a couple, '89 they were 1-15, '90 7-9, '91 11-5 went to the playoffs. So it was kind of like that build in '92 world champs. So there's different types of turnarounds. We're not talking about that multiple year turnaround. It's that 1 year turnaround. And Jose, I kind of wanted to ask you because we're doing our top in NFL history, our top five. Jose has his five, I have mine. What for you mattered the most when you were weighing out and you're going like 5-1? What were something that like stood out to you that like mattered in kind of ranking these 1 year turnarounds?
Yeah, and it's similar to what you just talked about there. I mean, like with the Detroit Lions, and like obviously we're talking 1 year turnarounds, right? Like there's a lot of those, but for me, when I looked at these teams, it was a lot of teams, obviously, but what I wanted to do was kind of look at like these turnarounds and what they did to these franchises. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, so you talked about Detroit and how Detroit was last in the division for how many years, no play. Last year they won their first playoff game since like 90 or 91 when Barry Sanders and them beat the Cowboys. And that's a long time, dude, like not to win a playoff game. And so things like that I was looking at like, all right, like this team turned it around and then completely shifted the culture of this entire franchise fan base, whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? Like, so that's what kind of something I was looking at. I also took in consideration like the longevity of the turnaround, which I shouldn't have, but the longevity of the turnaround. So you talked about the Dallas Cowboys, right? And it's like, all right, they went from 1-15 to I think 7-9 to
Hmm.
like 11-5, and it's just like it just kept going 13-3, and it was just like that. I looked at that too. You know what I'm saying? Like, and again, I know that's not the right criteria with our list, but um that to me was like sort of important. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, like there's a lot of teams that turned it around for 1 year. The next year they probably sucked again. You know what I'm saying? Like, but that I'm not saying they're not on my list because of that, but again, the way I ranked my 1 to 5, that added a little bit to it.
Okay, no, that makes sense. I can say a little bit of your first answer. So I it's kind of similar where I looked at how bad the culture had been
Yes.
and how
Right.
much losing and how like just or how bad the situation was like in before the turnaround. And with that, maybe it was wrong, and maybe I kind of did what you did because then sometimes I waited if it was years of bad and then they had that turnaround that
Right.
stood out. Then like, oh, you had like you've been kind of decent. You had
Couple
one bad year,
injuries.
yeah, you had
Right.
one
Like,
bad year, and then you had the turnaround again. That still counts as a 1 year turnaround, I guess. But someone who had 18 years of losing,
right.
and then like they have like a 10-win season, and the year before they were 5-11, and
Right.
they go 11-5. Or like just something that it was just like really bad. Like I go with that. I go with like how bad a situation was, and also I had to go to not what we see them as now, but putting ourselves in the present moment. So there's certain teams that now it's like, oh, they were loaded, but it's like if you
Yes.
go back to when that 1 year turnaround happened, no one knew who these guys were. No one had expectations for them, and they caught the people off by surprise like, whoa, these guys. And so, of course, like, after a while, when they became great players, you're like, oh, well, they had these players, but those players hadn't proven anything yet. And
Right.
we didn't expect them to do anything at the time or at all. And they showed us that mattered to me.
Yeah, no, I also put that criteria on my list too, like the historic level of losing and what this organization was prior to this turnaround. And again, even if it was for 1 year, that was a huge deal, like in terms of like that turnaround really sticking out to me. So I wanted to ask you, Deremy, like, what do you think, like, when it comes to looking at your list and stuff, like, because I kind of I saw some trends with my list, like in terms of what catapulted this turnaround. You know what I'm saying? Like, so for you, what do you think it was like important for most of these teams on your list that, like, one of the reasons why maybe some of these teams turned it around so quickly?
I believe you could look at certain players and coaches, I guess, coming on board, or maybe not even coming on board, but it kind of clicked for them
Yeah,
and it clicked, and maybe no one had expectation of it clicking, but the certain players, certain coaches coming in and making it like finally work. Um, and also, I looked at a lot of times. If I look at what I have for my list, like I said, you have to be in the year, in that moment of what the expectation were. It's a lot of like ragtag group of guys, like it's
okay,
not like, oh, it was star-studded with all these guys. It's kinda like and that there weren't some great players on the team, but it's a lot of, like, it's just a workman like, you don't look at the roster and go, "It's just loaded with all this Hall of Fame talent necessarily." And even if there was Hall of Famers on it, in that moment, in that year, ain't nobody thought of this person going to Canton. that is kind of like a trend I feel like for my list. If I'm That's a good question. If I'm looking at it, I didn't think about it, but looking at who I have 5 through 1, I think those are some characteristics. How about you?
Yeah, no, same thing for me. And I think, you know, what I kind of noticed with mine, it was like certain positions you needed to hit on that position,
Hmm.
and so obviously like coaching is important, GMs are important, but I felt like there was a couple of positions with the teams on my list that they hit on off season or a draft before, and like you mentioned, it just kind of came together that following season. And it was funny because I finished my list today actually, and I was just like, man, like that's it. It's pretty cool. Like it's actually two positions that almost each of these teams hit on, and it really rejuvenated these franchises. So, um, yeah, I thought that was pretty cool.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm ready to jump into it because
Go
I'm
ahead,
real
kick it off,
curious.
man. Yeah,
You
kick it
want me
off,
to
dude.
start it off?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so
kick it
we'll
off,
go
man.
back and forth for everyone listening. We're gonna go 5 to 1, and if we kind of have, because we haven't talked about who's on our list. Like I don't know who's on Jose's. He doesn't know who's on mine. So if we do have some overlap, he will join in and say, this one is number whatever on my list, and
Right.
he'll add to it as well, and vice versa. So, all right, I'll start it off. I'm going number 5. This was maybe the toughest. The other 4 teams were easy
Yeah.
slam dunks. 5, I was back and forth with this one and another one that a lot of people might be upset, but I'm going to go with the 2001 Patriots
Okay,
for
that's
my,
my. Go ahead.
huh?
Go ahead. That's my number five. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Cool. That works. So I look at it like this, right? Now we all know about the dynasty and what were to come from it. But you look at in 2000, Patriots are 5-11. Bill Belichick is okay, the guy who bombed out in Cleveland.
Yep.
Parcells is coordinator. They gave Drew Bledsoe the $100 million contract, and I remember a lot of the thought was like, okay, you got Drew Bledsoe, but you have nothing else here, and you gave him this big contract, and what are you going to do with it? You look at that squad, honestly, Jose, outside of like Ty Law at that point,
Yeah.
who you're like, all right, he's a Pro Bowl type of cornerback. Even I don't believe Willie McGinnis he was a good player, but he wasn't like, oh, he's one of the best defensive players in the game. A lot of workman like guys on that defense. The offense was really patched with there's no real weapons on it.
None.
The offensive line was not like this star-studded offensive line. You had Damian Woody and I think Mike Compton, and Woody wound up playing center in 2001. And when it was a shotgun, they would switch. Which how many times have you ever heard this?
I
You
know.
switch centers for depending on if it's shotgun or the quarterback's going under the center. That's crazy to me.
Yeah.
And the fact that this team, you all know what happened week 2. Mo Lewis hitting Drew Bledsoe and Brady coming in. But the way they won, Jose, it was a team effort. And I was back and forth. What made me put them on the list was to go from 5-11 to 11-5. And then if you look at their playoff run, the Raiders, the Steelers, the Rams, every game that they played in, clearly a more talented team. Like not even close.
Yes. Yes.
Like the Steelers were 15-1 that year. People forget that. And if you look at these games, the Raiders in that Tuck Rule game outplayed them, but they
Yeah.
found a way. The Steelers knocking out Brady, Bledsoe coming in, and then they did in Super Bowl 36 against the Rams. They were outclassed every game and wind up winning it, and like clearly outclassed, but they just play better as a unit. I just think that's why I have to give them just for what they did. If you look at that roster now, you can see Tom Brady, and we know him, but it was second year in the league, first year for Tom Brady. Other than that, Ty Law's in the Hall of Fame, but I think you might be someone who you're not even sure Ty Law should be in the Hall of Fame. But
Eh,
he's tough. He's a good player,
he
but
was really good.
it's not a loaded, like, great talented team, that '01 team. So that's the reasons why they had to make my top 5.
Yeah, they actually were my number four. I'm sorry, I said number five, but they're my number four. But there's not much to add to that. I mean, but hindsight, obviously, looking at their coaching staff was amazing. Like, there's reasons why this team played so well this year and won the Super Bowl this year, you know. But yeah, talent wise, no one expected this team to obviously win the Super Bowl number one. But no, that turnaround was so rapid. You know what I mean? Like, and again, week two, it's not like Bledsoe was 8-1 or something, and he gets hurt and Brady
Right.
comes in and lose. You know what I'm saying? Like, it was week two. That season is over. You know what I'm saying? In everybody's eyes, and people thought Tom Brady was like a decent quarterback, a good backup, could be a starter in the NFL, but nobody knew what was coming. And this is the season where a lot of people, including myself sometimes, like always look back at like, oh, those first three Super Bowls were because of the defense, and da 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 da. This one really was the season that Brady was more of like a game manager type of player, and he made some huge throws. Obviously, you don't win the Super Bowl without making plays, and especially in the Super Bowl, he played really well. But this was that season where, yeah, he was a check down guy, like making a couple good throws. They were running the ball and then lean on that defense pretty well. So, no, this was a good one. I was on the fringe too of having them on the list, but the turnaround, and then obviously they won the Super Bowl, and that's not for me a criteria that puts you in here, but that's a huge deal, obviously.
Well, and also we have to look at it too. They lose Sunday Night Football week 10 to who they wind up playing in a Super Bowl, the Rams. It's a close game. The Rams are the best team in the league, but they're 5-5. They're at 500 at that point.
Yeah,
So, not that the team didn't have adversity too, where it wasn't like even with Brady, his record wound up being really good. He was up going 11-3 during the regular season, but at one point, he loses a couple games. They're 5-5. He's at that, 5-3 at that point. You're kind of wondering, are the Patriots going to make the playoffs, let alone that's the last game they lose for the year. They wind up going on a win streak to win the division. And I will be honest, I was impressed with them at that game, Sunday Night Football on ESPN. They played them tough, and I thought, man, they're 5-5, but if they can kind of hold on, they can maybe squeak into the wild card, 9-7. So that
yeah,
also is impressive. That even during the year, they it wasn't like, oh, Brady came in and they just never lost. No, it was rocky at one point. There was, hey, do you go back to Drew Bledsoe? Do you do this?
yep.
Do you do that? It took a lot of guts from Belichick and the coaching staff to keep with Brady, and it paid off with that great win streak. But it wasn't always smooth sailing in 01.
No, absolutely not. It was a lot of bumps on the road for sure that led up to a lot of the success that they had, obviously, in years later, and all the success, the best dynasty probably in NFL history. But yeah, this team was not the Randy Moss Patriots, you know what I mean, and Tom Brady and setting all those world records. This team was, like you mentioned, a lot of guys, a lot of patchwork guys, a lot of guys that became very good players later on, but not this year. You know what I'm saying? Like, well, obviously this year, yes, but they were not the household names that they became. So it's a good way
Okay.
to kick it off, though.
So
Great.
that's my 5, and that's your 4.
It's my four. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to go to you then. Who's your,
Yeah.
your fifth?
My fifth team, which was in my mind, I wanted to put them a little higher, but these other turnarounds are to me were a little more impressive. But you talked about, one of your criterias being like historical losing and, kind of like turning something around that no one saw really coming. And so my number five was the first original worst to first was the 79 Tampa Bay Bucks. That's my number five. And so obviously we all know what the Bucks were at this time. And in 76 they were 0-14, and then in 77 they started off 0-12, and then won their last two games. So they were on a 26-game losing streak. They were the laughing stock of the NFL. If you watch, NFL films, you watch bloopers and things like that, half of them are probably those Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and they were just the worst team of all time in the NFL. And no one, in 77 they had the first overall pick, and I think they took Ricky Bell number one overall, and then 78 they draft Doug Williams 17th overall, and then that kind of changed a lot, obviously, for the franchise and stuff. And that's kind of where I was saying earlier, where like that you have to hit on a couple of key positions. And in 79, you hit on a running back, you're doing pretty well probably, and then you hit on a quarterback, then obviously that's going to take off, and you're going to play well. And then in 70, I think it was 79, they finished 10-6, but they started the season 4-4. No, that was 78. I'm sorry, 78. They started 4-4. Doug Williams gets hurt. They had the great defense and but you starting to see in 78, like, all right, like they got a couple of really good players. And then in 79, they win their first 5 games. They're 5-0. They're the last undefeated team in the league. They're on Sports Illustrated and everybody's going crazy over the Bucks. And, they had the number 1 defense again at this time with Leroy Selman. And that Tampa Bay defense was no joke, and then Ricky Bell was having a great year, their first 1,000-yard rusher that year. And, they were the fastest expansion team to make their playoffs. They finished 10-6. They go from a 26-game losing streak, Deremy, to making the NFC Championship game in 79. And to me, I think, like, again, they were the original worst to first. But if you think about how bad of an organization one can be and to turn it around in a year, I think this is easily was my number 5 team in the 79 Bucks.
Yeah, this is my number 1.
Thanks. There you go. And look, that's not an argument here. I get it.
Yeah, this is my number 1 because I'll be honest, Doug Williams was a smart player and he shouldn't have landed to the Bucks in 78.
No.
But Doug Williams was really that game manager. The offense was all Ricky Bell
Yeah.
in 79. And you look at it, they were 5-11, so you go from 5-11 to 10-6. But then I had to count in how bad of a laughing stock. The 76, you start off going 0-14, and then going the next year 0-12, and the way the draft system was so set up for them to fail, where you just got everyone's rejects. It wasn't like you saw in the 90s with Carolina and Jacksonville where they got
Right.
people's best players, and that's why their second year they could go to the championship game. It was like set up for them to succeed. This was set up to screw them over, and John McKay is known as a great college coach, and he gets kind of mocked, and rightfully so a little bit for how bad it was in those early years, but no one talks about the amazing turnaround that he did in
Yeah.
that short of time with getting everyone's rejects for the most part. Besides, you're able to get Leroy Selman, great Leroy Selman. Other than
Yeah.
that, you're just filling up with rejects, and then you got Doug Williams in 78 and Ricky Bell 79. You look at that team, it's nobody. It's not a good collective group. Leroy Selman's great. Doug Williams, game manager, and I love Doug Williams. Wasn't what he did in Washington. He was a game
No.
manager at the time. And not only I look at to go to 10-6 and to get into the playoffs with just a defense that was playing like kind of well as a unit, but not a great individual group of guys besides Leroy. They get the playoff win over the Eagles in that divisional game,
Yep.
and that's what's huge. And that they're 9 points away. They lose 9-0 in that championship game from getting to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
If people don't know, you look back, they were the laughing stock. Johnny Carson's making fun of them. Everyone's laughing at. They were that much of
Everyone.
an embarrassment. And to get there where the Iran hostages or surprised Tampa Bay when they found out they're almost in the Super Bowl, this is my number 1 that I think doesn't. People talk about the 76 team, which is fascinating. Not enough about the 79 team.
No, I get it. This is a great selection. This is what our criteria is all about. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like this type of team here, you know what I mean? Like just going from, they were literally the worst team ever. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like just the worst team ever. And, you talked about even like, they traded the first overall pick. I mean, not the first overall pick. They traded the pick to Houston and they select Earl Campbell. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like people are like, oh my God, like they can't do anything right. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it was just bad after bad after bad after bad. And again, how many NFL clips are we seeing of the Tampa Bay Bucks and back in those days? And people were even laughing at like their logo, like they was, it was just bad. The
No one's
creamsicles.
laughing now.
No, absolutely not. Those were some of the best uniforms ever. But at the time, people were laughing at them, So now this was, to me, it was a slam dunk, had to be in the top five. But you having it number one, there's no debate here for me.
Yeah, but I'm glad you had him on there. I thought you might, but I'm glad you did. So, all right. So Jose's number five that he picked the 79 Bucks. Um, his number four is my number five with the '01 Patriots. So then back to me at number four, and I'm going down to New Orleans. I'm looking at the 2006 Saints as my
Yeah.
number four turnaround. And, we've had some episodes this past year talking about what happened with Oakland and losing the A's now, and they lost the Raiders, lost the Warriors. And this, to me, was a far gone conclusion back in 2005
Hmm.
with New Orleans and what the devastation of Hurricane Katrina. And I mean, I think a lot of people kind of now forget how big of that's one of the defining moments of the 2000s, like
Oh
that
yeah.
hurricane. And we had big bad hurricanes this year. I feel like sadly every year we have them.
Yeah.
I only remember the name of one, and that's Hurricane Katrina. So with this, and that the Saints had to play their games in San Antonio or Baton Rouge,
At
the soup,
LSU, yeah.
yeah, the Superdome was used as like refuge for and all the horror stories that were happening there. It was like you got to tear that stadium down and just move this team, and it's like Tom Benson's going to move this team. The fact that he stayed and you signed Drew Brees, who wasn't like he was a lock, Jose,
Right.
because of that shoulder. Sean Payton, pretty like well known assistant, but like hey, first time being a head coach, and for him to come in there and to reopen the Superdome in what still might be the most emotional football game I ever saw, like the pregame with U2 and Green Day like performing, and then when Steve Gleason blocks that punt, you
Yeah.
knew they were winning that game, and you knew that year was going to be something else. And for that team to get in there to the playoffs and go to the championship game after we thought New Orleans wasn't going to recover, the city in whole, we thought there's no way the Saints aren't moving to some other team. I don't think I'm not saying Tom Benson was a perfect owner at all, but I think he should get more credit for keeping that team there, eventually winning the Super Bowl, and now the Saints, we know like their fan base is huge and they're really, really like known like they ain't going nowhere. But just for the degree of difficulty, I gotta give it to the '06 Saints.
Yeah, that's my number three. Um, yeah, that I don't know if there's a bigger obstacle they had a team had to deal with in an off season or a year prior to what they had to deal with. You know what I mean? Like with Katrina and not playing again, like you mentioned, not having any home games. Like imagine that. Like pretty much all your games are on the road, and fans were upset. When they were playing at LSU or Baton Rouge or wherever, like fans were upset and they weren't even showing up to those games. So there was a ton of rumors of they were going to move the Saints out of there, and I think if they would have outside of New Orleans, if they would have moved the Saints, people would have probably been like, yeah, no, we get it, like we understand. Like I don't blame them for wanting to do that, but you mentioned hiring Sean Payton that off season, like which obviously was a huge deal. Signing Drew Brees, which was not a lock. You know what I mean? Like but I was looking at too, Deremy, like everything you talked about, and I was looking at that '06 draft too. Like, and if you look at that draft, right, like they had the number two pick, right? Because the previous year they were not that good. They were 3-13 in '05. They select Reggie Bush, who should have been the number one overall pick, but Reggie Bush lands on their lap. They just bring in Drew Brees, who again like had a lot to prove coming off that shoulder injury. But their first round pick was Reggie Bush. The second round pick was Roman Harper, who played for them for a long time, was a good player. Fourth round was Jahari Evans, possible Hall of Famer. Rob Ninkovich was like their fifth round pick, which is not a superstar, but played in the league for a long time.
Very good player, yeah.
Right. And then the seventh round they picked Marcus Colston, from Hofstra. Like it was just starters all over that draft, and I think that this year shifted the entire franchise in New Orleans because even if you think about it, like historically. Like they had, I'm trying to remember what year it was. I think '04 they were 8-8, and they were nothing special. It was just a good team, a solid team. And I think before that was like probably the Dome Patrol in the
Well,
early
they
'90s.
had 2000 with Aaron Brooks,
Aaron Brooks, yeah,
and they
yeah.
beat the Rams. They were defending champs. They knocked them. They beat them in the wild card game with Jim Haslett.
Jim
Like
Haslett,
they
yeah,
they
yeah,
did. That was like their first playoff win. Was only a few years for that long that franchise. That first playoff win was at Aaron Brooks, and
yeah. In
they
2000,
yeah,
yeah.
they beat the Rams.
Yeah, so I mean, and again, like early '90s was some success, but this was a historically bad franchise, and then this season comes, and this '06 season, that Steve Gleason block punt, there's a statue outside the stadium for that. That's how big of a deal that was, and I remember watching that, and I was like, this is like the atmosphere was nuts. That they always say that was the loudest the Superdome was, or whatever this dome is called now at this point, but Mercedes-Benz Dome, I think it is, or something like that. But it was the loudest they ever heard it at that time. You know what I mean? Like, and it was just an incredible atmosphere. And then the whole culture shifted. And obviously, Drew Brees staying healthy and becoming whatever he became with Sean Payton, and you got Deuce McAllister, Joe Horn. Like, he had a lot of good players. You know what I mean on that offense, and that defense started to turn around a little bit too. So, and it just from here, they became what the Saints are today. You know what I mean? Like, and they were just not a dominant, but they won a lot of games, won a Super Bowl a couple years later. So this '06, yeah, this turnaround for me was also pretty big. So I had them at number 3.
Yeah, and I just say I don't know if people remember that game, but for a non like playoff game, I don't know if I ever felt like that Monday night game against the Falcons, Vic coming into town, that was circled because it was like they're reopening, and it was one of those times where the game mattered, but it was in like I was like, I hope they can win going into it, but it was bigger than the game,
Right,
and
right.
not just saying that because of our podcast, but
Yeah,
it was
they were
what
back.
the, they were back, and what the divide was. If you people may not remember how big of a deal Hurricane Katrina was, and that was the talk of the nation. And like I said, that's a defining like where were you moment. And you remember just seeing the devastation and seeing all those people in the Superdome. The Superdome part of it got torn up by Katrina. So it was like, and then you heard the horror stories of what was
Yeah,
happening, people losing their lives in there. So to me, it was almost like, can you at the time thinking, can you play there just because of what happened in there? Like, just too
yeah,
much scars in people's mind. So then to see that place reopen and to see the atmosphere, like I said, I can be honest. I remember when Steve Gleason blocked that punt, I had tears because I'm like, this is, you could feel it, man. And I've watched that clip over and over. And it was the power of what sports can do for a community. And
yeah,
I do believe, because you're right, there's a great draft class there. Drew Brees, they signed him, future Hall of Famer. But I just believe there was something about that squad that it was just that good mojo that was going to keep riding that wave. Like it was something different because Jahari Evans definitely, I think he should be in the Hall of Fame. We didn't know that with him. Colston broke out that year for sure.
yeah.
Reggie was kind of like you
It was
can't
hit
use
and
him
miss.
every
Yeah,
you can't
right.
use him every down. And he's
But you
like out
had
of the
Deuce
backfield.
McAllister. They had a two-headed monster back there.
Yeah.
So
So it was like some pieces there, but it was like, oh, you saw the future, but it's like this even go to the playoffs, and then they won a playoff game, and it's like they're one game away from the Super Bowl. They lost to the Bears, but it was a team effort. Like I know you could look at it now and say there's some superstars, but if you watch the Saints in '06, that was a collective team unit. So
right, that was
yeah,
the first time ever in the NFC Championship game for New Orleans. Like that's a big deal. You know what I'm saying? This team's been around for a long time, and yeah, that turnaround. And again, they talked about how it helps New Orleans bounce back and things like that. And I wasn't in New Orleans when all this happened, obviously. But I can understand how that can be the case. Sports is a good kind of like good forgetter on like what's going on in life. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm not saying it helped everyone get out of that stuff, but I'm sure it helped people, kind of forget from time to time on Sunday. So This team was a special team for sure in '06.
Absolutely. So that's my number 4, and that's your number 3.
Yeah, so you're
So
back up. Yeah.
if I look at the list for you so far, you have number 5, 79 Bucks, number 4, '01 Patriots, and number 3, your '06 Saints. For me, 5, '01 Patriots, 4, '06 Saints, and then I have, you said my number 1, which is the 79 Bucks. So I have 3 and 2, you have 2 and 1. So do you want me to go back, or do you want to go with your number 2?
No, no, go ahead with your number three. That's fine.
So my number 3, we're going to take it to, yeah, we hit the '70s and we've hit some 2000s, but we're going to go into the '80s,
Okay.
and I'm going with the '81 49ers.
Okay. That
That's
way
my
they
number
almost made my
3.
list. They were like my number six if I had
Yeah.
another one.
So the reason why I have this team here is because I know it's 1 year. So the year before, 6 and 10. That's year 2 under Montana and Walsh. I know 2 years ago, that's the first year they were 2 and 14. So you go
Yes.
2 and 14, you go to 6 and 10, and if you look at it, this team, the average age was 25. And what happened with this team going from 6 and 10, and Montana really emerging as the quarterback? But you look at what they had to do with that defensive backfield when you draft Ronnie Lott and Eric Wright, Carlton Williamson. So you have 3 rookies in the secondary starting, and you have Eric Hicks, who was working. He was the OG Kurt Warner, working in a
Yeah.
grocery store, bagging groceries. And that's your starting backfield. And George Seifert working with him so hard to get them ready. And just if you look at this team, man, it's not loaded. You got Dwight Clark. It's not what we saw later with Jerry Rice and John Taylor.
Right.
It's Dwight Clark and Freddie Solomon. Their leading rusher had like 500 something yards rushing on the ground. And why this team matters to me is, look at the collective group. It's the least loaded of the 49ers dynasty to go from 6 and 10 to world champs. But also Bill Walsh, and they're doing it with this funky, what's this thing? The West Coast offense. So
Yeah.
I had to put them number 3 because they did it in a different way that the NFL wasn't used to. And to go from 6 and 10, you're a laughing stock. What are they doing in San Francisco? Eddie DeBartolo, you're crazy for hiring this weird Walsh guy. And guess what? We're going to flip it on you, and we're going to be world champs the next year. That's amazing to me. So I got to give it 1981 Niners as my number 3 1-year turnaround.
And the crazy part is like we talked about earlier, Jeremy, where it's like, at the time, people knew Ronnie Lott and a couple of other players, but they didn't know how great they were going to become. And in '84, it's one of the best defenses of all time, you know what I'm saying? Like, and especially in 49ers history. But, so those guys, man, they built that thing, man. They built that thing right. And like you mentioned, like they hit on a lot of those guys in that draft, and they just kept hitting and hitting and hitting and hitting, you know what I'm saying? Like, and they became what we now know is the best team in the '80s. You know what I'm saying? Like the best, one of those dynasties where you could put it behind the Patriots and a couple other dynasties, but maybe the Steelers, and that's about it. You know what I mean? Like they're not taking a backseat to too many teams. You know what I'm saying? Like, and this team again, like this was probably their quote unquote worst team out of all these '80s championships. But it's the one that kicked it off. You know what I mean? Like, so I looked at this team. I looked at them as like that, kind of similar to what that '91 Cowboys were. It was just like super terrible, nice season, and then that boom, they hit right there. So now this was a good one. I thought about adding this one to my top five. It was tough keeping them out, but they were my number
I
six.
give it because 6 and 10 to then, I what, 13 and 3 the next
I
year,
believe so.
and then I remember seeing Randy Cross talk about, the Super Bowl that year was in Detroit, and they played their first game at the Lions. They lost that game, and they said what they thought was, hey, we're so far from the Super Bowl, at least we could say we played in the same spot the Super
Yeah,
Bowl is going to happen. So the fact that that's what you say in week 1, and then you wind up being there. And if you look at that squad, man, it's still like Ronnie Lott is great, but he was a rookie then.
yeah,
He's a rookie in '81. Montana's not Montana yet. You know, we can look at it. Those years before, he was still kind of battling with Steve DeBerg and kind of get that spot.
Yeah.
So Dwight Clark, that's the best year he has. He does get a 1,000-yard receiving season. The only time he did it in his career. So Dwight Clark, nice receiver, wasn't a star like that, and we know him for the
They hype him
catch.
up though. They hype him up though.
Well, he has that catch, and that catch is part of 81.
Yes, it is.
So the catch happened that year, but I just think you look at how young that was, and that's truly a young team. The average age is 25 on this squad,
Yeah.
and to do it in a different way, that's why I got to give it. And they did like a worst to first, and they wound up not just getting into the playoffs, but they wound up being world champs. So I'm really impressed with the 81 Niners as a 1 year turnaround. So they were number 3 on my list.
And the thing is, with that team being so young at this era of the NFL, I'm going to think it's unheard of. You know what I'm saying? Like this isn't like the era of free agency. This is you draft guys and they stay on your team for years and years and years. So to kind of have to restart and retool your whole entire team almost, and to have that average age, you know what I'm saying, for your entire team. It's not like we said the defense. No, it was the entire team. That's you're literally starting from scratch. You know what I'm saying? Like, and to have that success right away, and then obviously, having that really good young team is going to equate to a lot of success moving forward, which obviously happened, like we mentioned. It makes it even more impressive. But again, I know we're trying to live in the moment there. It's an impressive team that had the youngest team probably in the league win a Super Bowl. That's saying something.
And you look at it, the real veteran is like Hacksaw Reynolds, who's like a workman type kind of a guy.
Right, right.
And what was huge this year, though, was during the season or for the trade deadline, trading for a future Hall of Famer and Fred Dean, who people kind of San Diego was like whatever on him. They didn't think he had it. Fred Dean comes and he was that difference maker.
Yeah,
The way they talk about Charles Haley being a difference maker in Dallas, Fred Dean coming in during the year, that first game against the Cowboys, being a one-man wrecking crew, sacking Danny White, and not he got there like on a Wednesday. He winds up getting like 3 sacks in the first half. Halftime, he's smoking some cigarettes and then going out and kicking ass again.
there you
That's
go.
just badass. That was a huge move by the Niners and Bill Walsh to get Fred Dean. And I think that move, Jose, put him over the top because I've heard
Yeah,
Anthony Munoz say when he talked about the toughest pass rushers he faced, and that's the greatest left tackle ever, in my opinion. The
absolutely.
first name I hear him say is Fred Dean. So that's also I gotta give him credit for to make that savvy of a move during the year to bring in someone that people thought he's done, and he winds up leading you to be starting this dynasty. Big up to Bill Walsh and that whole front office too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so that's Deremy's number 3. We got the 81 49ers. So we're both
So
at 3. And
yeah,
I know
so
you got your 1. So you have
you
1
have your
left.
2. I want to hear your number 2.
Yeah, my number 2 is probably going to be a surprise to be at number 2. I'm sure in a lot of people's list, this is probably number 1. But my number 2 is the 99 St. Louis Rams. I know Jeremy's rocking the St. Louis gear on for our YouTube watchers on watching this episode today. But that's my number. That's my number 2. And again, I know people are probably like, "What are you talking about? They won the Super Bowl. They made Disney movies after this team." Like, and I 100% understand that. Like, this was an amazing turnaround. This was an historic turnaround. I not taking any of that away. So let's look into this a little bit, right? Like we've been doing. So in 98, they were what, 4-12, right? And this is Dick Vermeil's. People are talking about 99. If he doesn't turn this around, even the ownership kind of was like, yo, you got to turn this around this year. You know what I'm saying? Like they brought Dick Vermeil in. We talked about Dick Vermeil 100 times on this episode, on this podcast, of how he's one of the guys that, like, you look at Bill Parcells or guys like that can just come in and just change your franchise around and just start creating success. They brought Dick Vermeil in to do that as well, and it wasn't working out. You know what I mean? Like in 99 was possibly his last year, and so they go again. The 98 they go 4-12. That off season they hired Mike Martz from Washington, and he's pushing them. He's like, look, there's a guy coming in free agency, Trent Green. We should sign him. They signed Trent Green, and this is why they're my number two, Deremy, because I remember, and I'm trying to go back to 98 or 99, and I remember coming into that season, and I was like, St. Louis is going to be all right. You know what I mean? Like that all season, they trade for Marshall Faulk. We all know Marshall Faulk was a great player already coming into the league. He had a great season, and he was the year before he was the Colts' entire offense. You know what I mean? Like, and I know they had Peyton Manning, but he led the league in intercept. I think he had 26 interceptions or something like that year. Marshall Faulk led the league in total yards, and he should have won the MVP, but I think who won the MVP? Gerald, I think that
Was it TD?
TD won that. Yeah, yeah,
I
he won
thought
that
so
year.
with the
Yeah,
2,000-yard season. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, um, yeah. So all of that, I feel like they had Isaac Bruce already here. You bring in Trent Green, you bring in Marshall Faulk. They draft Torrey Holt. Odds Akim's already there. They have all these speedsters out everywhere, as we know. And preseason comes in, and Trent Green, we all know what happened. Rodney Harrison with the hit. Trent Green goes down out for the year. Now they got this guy coming in as the backup, Kurt Warner, and this is where obviously the story gets pretty good. And we all know what happened this season, right? And they go win the Super Bowl, have a great season. They go 13-3, and but I was also looking there, and I'm not taking it away from 13-3. And I'm not here to shit on St. Louis Rams at this time, but they played two playoff teams that entire season. I mean, they were blowing everybody out, and rightfully so. Like they were just great offense, and I think they set a record for like scoring 30 points in like 10 of 12 games or something like that. And we did an episode, check the archives on
Check
this
them.
team. And definitely there's a lot of respect for the St. Louis Rams at this time, but you know, um, Kurt Warner becomes Kurt Warner. You know what I mean? Disney movie and all that comes out for him. But I felt like the only reason they're not number one for me, Deremy, is because yes, they turned it around. They went from 4-12 to 13-3. That's an amazing turnaround, But in my mind, I felt like they were going to be pretty good. Like they were going to be much better than 4-12 in '99. And I was right, you know what I'm saying? But not for the reason why I thought. I thought Trent Green was going to be a decent, serviceable quarterback, and he was going to come in and play well. And they added all these weapons, and the defense was really good, also. You know what I mean? Like, so they had a decent team. They just needed that quarterback to put them over the top. The one quarterback that put them over the top is not the one we all expected. So to me, that's my number two. St. Louis Rams, 13-3.
Yeah, this is interesting because they don't make my list.
Ooh,
They
I
don't
thought
make
I
my
was being
list.
controversial. Oh shit, go ahead,
They
man.
are off the list because I think what this is an example of the greatest one-year turnaround player in Kurt Warner, the greatest like Cinderella story. I honestly feel like Tom Brady almost like market corrected him because Brady's run was 2 years later, and people forget like Kurt Warner was like the Cinderella story of sports for a couple years. But I have to look at it like this. Like I said, and like you said, going back to '99, take yourself in that moment. You look at the team. You have Orlando Pace there.
Yeah,
Future Hall of Famer, and was showing that signs of a great left tackle despite going to Ohio State. But
he was
like,
great at Ohio State too.
despite
So
being a Buckeye, he was still pretty good. You look at, like you said, trading for Marshall Faulk, that was huge. Isaac Bruce was there. We knew who he was. And now I'll say this, we did not expect Torrey Holt to jump off the way
no,
he
we did not.
did, but we did look at that as a good first round pick for them and that he's going to contribute right away and be a good complementary player to Isaac Bruce. Did we expect him to be that great 1-2 combo so early? I'm not going to
No.
say we expected that, but that was looked at as Torrey Holt's a good pick for the Rams. This is going to be a good team. And I'll say this, if Trent Green stays healthy and they have this run, the level of surprise goes down a lot. Not saying that people
Oh,
wouldn't have been surprised.
absolutely.
People would have been surprised, but it wouldn't have been that high if Trent Green stays healthy. And I think that shows you something, in my opinion, that could it make a list of turnarounds? For sure. Top five? Nah. And I know a lot of people have him number one.
Yeah,
And I think people just overlook what the circumstances were. they had made so many moves. You knew London Fletcher was emerging, and that defense. Um, but I just have to say, it's the Kurt Warner story. But there's a reason why. For me, why I left him off the list, the '06 Saints. It was what a surprise. There's no nicknames or anything like this because it's like we didn't expect it to come. The '01 Patriots didn't see it coming. $79 didn't see it coming. There's something to me when we have the greatest show on that was happening right during the year, and obviously it's because of the big play offense, but I think it's because there's a lot of these big name guys on this team. Not Kurt Warner was people weren't know, but Marshall Faulk and Isaac Brute, like people were looking at it like, okay, this is a big time offense. No one's going to call the '01 Patriots some crazy greatest show because we were like, who is this? Who's Kevin? Who Faulk? Not
Yeah,
Marshall? I don't know him. Like, 81 Niners were like, Dwight, who? The pretty boy and Freddie South. We still don't know them.
right.
Like we do, but a lot of people still don't know who. I bet you ask a common fan, 81 Niner, Jerry Rice. They don't know these guys. The 99 Colts had a lot of talent, and I just think it's, if Trent Green was healthy, the surprise would go down substantial. And I feel like I can't say that for any other team on this list. You know, the '01 Patriots, if Drew Bledsoe is healthy and they do what they did, the surprise is still crazy. Is
Right.
it crazier because of Brady? Yes. But I think if Bledsoe's healthy, Mo Lewis doesn't have that hit, they go on to the Super Bowl, it's like, can you believe this? Like, it would have shocked everybody. The Trent Green plays, the surprise isn't as big.
It's not. No, and it was expected that to them they were going to be a better team.
A
You know what I
playoff
mean?
team,
Like,
I think.
right.
People were
And
thinking that.
I didn't know Mike Martz was going to come in and do everything that he did. I didn't expect that. You know what I'm saying? Like, but I did expect Marshall Faulk to have a close to 1,000. He almost had it in the year before. Yeah, I think he had like 900 yards receiving the year before, something like that. I knew Isaac Bruce was good. I knew Orlando Pace was good. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I knew some of those players were really good. So I that's why most lists that you see out here, this is their number one. But I couldn't put them number one because of that. But
No.
I'll be honest, like the argument you made, I totally understand why they're not on your list.
And they were close. Like, and we had a top 10, I would have put them on somewhere in the 10. Not saying they even would be 6, but they would have made it my top 10, I believe. But I just think, as interesting as a team as this is, as Jose said, that episode on them, I I shouldn't be surprised because people aren't going to dive deep into it. But I am surprised that so many make them the number one turnaround, 1 year turnaround. And I get it if you just look at 4-12, right? But 4-12, you had Tony Banks. Like it was just totally
Yeah,
different, man. It wasn't the same group. Um, Tony Banks lost with the greatest single season defense in 2000. He couldn't win games. Like, no offense to Tony Banks, but it's like, yeah, Tony Banks and Lawrence Phillips. Like, you were going to lose. So,
yeah,
like, all the changes that they made. Also, I do think they're the Niners. That '90s run was going down too, so the NFC West was prime for some taking as well. But sorry, St. Louis fans. That's why I wore the shirt, just so no hard feelings. But they're not on my list. But and Jose has been. I thought for sure you were gonna give him number one.
nah,
But
nah, nah, nah. Got a different
so
number one.
so your list so far is number 5, $79. Number 4, '01 Patriots. Number 3, '06 Saints. And number 2, '99 Rams. I am number 5, '01 Patriots. 4, '06 Saints. 3, the 81 Niners. And my number 1 is the $79. So I'm curious because let's go with your number 1, and then we'll see if my 2 is the same.
Okay.
And then that way, but who's your number 1?
I'm going to stay at 99. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to stay 99 with the Indianapolis Colts. That's not your number two?
Yeah, it is my number 2.
That's your number two. Okay. I think to me this was a bigger surprise. And again, I know people are going to say, "What, Peyton Manning?" All right, let's again, let's look at this historically at the time. You know what I mean? Like, and The Colts are coming off back to back 3-13 seasons. Like they're pretty much the laughing stock of the NFL at the time, and they didn't win 10 games since like 77. Like it was something insane. Like, and this is, I know they had I can't remember what year. I think it was 90. I can't remember what year. Oh, it was 95, I think, when they
Was
went
it with Jim Harbaugh?
with Jim Harbaugh. Yeah,
Yeah,
like they had that,
95.
but that season came out of nowhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
he
and
was Captain Comeback. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and but I can remember growing up, and we've talked about it on this podcast a lot of times as well, Deremy, where the Patriots and the Colts were a joke. You know what I mean? Like they were the team on Madden where you practice on, like stuff like that. And this season coming in, they trade Marshall Faulk, right? We just talked about that. And they have like they had the fourth pick, and everybody is thinking like, all right, they traded Marshall Faulk, who was their entire offense. Peyton Manning threw for 3,000 yards. He started every game in '98, but threw a ton of picks. And folks were starting to wonder. He was getting beat up. He was getting hit a lot. People were starting to wonder, like, all right, like, is this going to be like a good fit? Whatever it was. But again, he started every game. People were excited. It was Peyton Manning. You know what I mean? And but they trade Marshall Faulk. Now they got this huge hole at running back. People are like, all right, they got the fourth pick. They'll possibly take Ricky Williams, but they surprise everybody. They take Edgerrin James from the U. And it's funny because you hear a lot of people from like Indianapolis, they didn't even know who he was. You know what I mean? Like I know you knew who he was, Jeremy. I definitely knew who he was. A lot of the fans, listening knew who Edgerrin James was, but I didn't know Edgerrin James. I knew he was good. I didn't know he was going to be this good. You know what I'm saying? Like in '99, he was a perfect fit. I'm not saying he was Marshall Faulk. He was pretty close to Marshall Faulk though. And
I think they were tied, honestly.
he was great, man.
He was
Edgerrin was
just as
great.
good like as Marshall Faulk in like those first couple years. I
Yeah,
think
he
Marshall kept it going, but in '99 and like 2000, it's a good debate of who was better. Those are the two best backs in football.
absolutely. And Edgerrin was a little bigger, so he can carry the load a little more, but still was
Right.
a third down back. He had great hands.
Could
You
block.
can block exactly, and he was just a great Hall of Famer, obviously, but a great player. And so you have that. I mean, people could say, all right, you have Peyton Manning and Marvin Harrison, like name and Marcus Pollard. Like he was a decent tight end, but they had nothing else. You know what I'm saying? Like they had a decent couple guys on the offensive line who were decent, but defensively they were horrible. Like, I would challenge anyone to name a player on that defense. I only know one or two players because I love playing with this team on Madden, but and it was the only reason I knew. Their defense was horrible. And again, they were 3-13 the last those two seasons prior to, and they start the season off. I can't. Let me see. I had it here, but they lost two of their first four games. Right? They were 2-2 first four games, but those two losses were only by 3 points each. And then they rattled off there. 10 wins in a row. And again, they finished 3-13. They won the division for the first time in 10 years. That was the last time they were in the AFC East, and they go to the AFC South the following season after the realignment. But it was the first time a team going 3-13 to 13-3. They set an NFL record doing that. You know, um, I don't know. I did not see that coming. You know what I'm saying, from the Colts. And again, you look at some of these other teams, and they're a little more balanced than this team was. This team was just all offense. And again, like they hit on a draft pick, and we talked about that throughout this episode. But Peyton Manning became Peyton Manning this season. Marvin Harrison was a good player, but he became Marvin Harrison this season. And then what happened with this team was, and this organization, where it just took off and became, again, like New Orleans did in '06, it became what we know now today is the Indianapolis Colts. And they go on this great run. They win a Super Bowl a couple years later. If it wasn't for the Patriots, they might be in a couple more Super Bowls. So for me, this is my number one. And I know everybody goes, and you talked about it too, Jeremy. Everybody 99 to go to the Rams. To me, this was more impressive, what the Colts did.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what Peyton Manning did. You saw talent in Peyton in '98, but setting the record, which he still has for most interceptions by a rookie quarterback. Marvin Harrison did not jump out to you. He had been in the league 3 years.
Right.
It was just like, okay. And yeah, I think I remember the reaction that people gave when they took Edgerrin James with that pick, and Ricky Williams, his stunned reaction in
Yeah,
the
people were
in the
looking
green
at Bill
room.
Polian like, "What are you doing, man?"
And I think it's fat. Bill Polian during COVID did a podcast,
Yeah,
and one of the episodes was on like that move, and hearing him talk about it now, I want to say easy because there's still pressure because everyone loved Ricky Williams, but seeing the behind the scenes stuff, it makes sense why it was very easy to take Edgerrin James. Same with the year before, Peyton Manning and Ryan Leaf,
right.
and we all can say that's easy, but there was a big talk
Yeah,
about who to take, and then when you hear Bill Polian talk, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. It's pretty easy to take Peyton Manning over
yeah,
Ryan Leaf, but we didn't have all that information, and it still took some guts. They were hard decisions to make. And people don't give enough credit to Jim Mora as a coach.
yes,
You talk about guys who turn things around. Didn't win playoff games, but he got you there, and he took around historically bad franchises with the Saints, and then what he did with the Colts. That Super Bowl in '06 is Tony Dungy's. That's his. But Jim Moore started that, and he needs to
yeah,
get credit more than he does for how good of a coach he has been, because he won with not always the most talent. And
yeah,
like you said, this defense, I know Cornelius Bennett is on it, but
yep,
it started that run also of the Colts having great offenses, but for a long time, really bad defenses,
yeah,
which is why they didn't get the playoff success for a long time because of it. But they still did win. And yeah, I remember 3-13 and 13-3 was huge. And you'll see a big thing was the Colts would never get a Madden Summerall game. But then when you had Aikman and Dion and Emmett and the Cowboy, they were fading. They were still big names. The Cowboys coming into town, and Peyton Manning talks about it, how big of a deal to have Madden and Summerall there. And then when you wind up seeing, Peyton hits Marvin Harrison gets that move on Dion, and he's just gone, and the Colts wind up winning that game. And if the passing of the torch, we had seen those triplets of the '90s, Irvin, Emmett, Troy Aikman. Now we had a new triplets with Edgerrin James, Marvin Harrison, and Peyton Manning, and that was a huge and important game for the start of that great Colts run. So I just think absolutely, I think however you want to look at it, for what it built in the future, but just 1 year turnaround alone, it wasn't for the 79 Bucks to be my number one. I think this one is more impressive in '99 than what the Rams did, but no one says that. Everyone always flips it, but I think you and
right.
I didn't know we would, but we agree like that '99 team, and they lost to the eventual AFC champions in Tennessee that year, but like you got to give them credit for what they did.
Yeah, and again, like you talked about, like them having the triplets, and then obviously later on they add a couple more players to that offense, and then free agency they start adding a bunch of defensive players. But this isn't like Dwight Freeney and Robert Mathis and Bob Sanders. Like none of those guys are on this defense, man. And it was a bad defense, and but again, like it changed the complete like layout of this organization from a laughing stock in the NFL where you got people remembering for Jeff George and things like that, like that from all of that losing in the early 90s and 80s or whatever, however back, again, they didn't have a 10-win season since 1977. This was 1999. This is, you know what I mean? Like that's 22 years. That's a long, long time in NFL years for sure, but to have that happen and then change the entire landscape of this franchise and the NFL. Like, then you got Brady Manning, that duo, and they're on prime time all the time. And I mean, rightfully so, because they were exciting games and, they're having a lot of regular season success. And again, like, in the playoffs was a little different, but it just the way they just changed everything from this season moving forward, man, like, and becoming the Colts and being a team that a lot of people loved and a lot of people like. I just love watching this team play, man. And it's just to me that all of that factored into me bumping them up to number one.
Okay, so we look at our list. Jose at number 5, the '79 Bucks. Number 4, the '01 Patriots. Number 3, the 2006 Saints. Number 2, the 99 Rams, and number 1, 99 Colts. My list, number 5, the '01 Patriots, 4, the '06 Saints, 3, the '81 49ers, 2, the 99 Colts, and 1, the '79 Buccaneers. Jose, was there any teams? I know you said the '81 Niners
They
was
were
a close
close.
call. Was there any other teams for you that was like hard to leave off for your
Yeah.
top five?
Yeah. Yeah, I know I looked at like the '04 Steelers was a team that I looked at and I was like, they it was a 6-10, I think, to 15-1, or something like that. And I thought about adding them on there. A couple Parcells teams, like the Jets teams, and I know that, a lot of people have that, is it the '08 Dolphins,
Mm-hmm.
on a lot of lists. Those are the three teams that I was like, I can maybe squeeze them in here, but it was hard for me to bump any of those teams over the '81 49ers. And then I couldn't add those three teams over any of those top five of mine. How about you?
Definitely. I thought the '08 Dolphins was kind of intriguing to me, and I was like, maybe I could put them on. What Parcells did was really impressive. I thought about what Parcells did in New England and how
Yeah.
bad that franchise was and what he's able to do with them, give them to the playoffs in like '94. So I thought about that. One that was really hard, probably the closest one that I really looked at but left him off was the '78 Eagles.
Okay.
And that's Dick Vermeil's third year. His first year getting into the playoffs. They had the miracle at the Meadowlands that year. That's his first year having even a first round draft pick. It was just they had at that point 16 years without a winning season, and they wind up with that roster fighting and scratching and clawing. They get into the playoffs. They lose a heartbreaker to Atlanta because their kicker got hurt, and Mike Michelle was the punter, and he was doing both, and he's misses some extra points and everything.
Yeah.
But they lose a close one in Atlanta. But they got to the playoffs, and just with you look at that roster and what Dick Vermeil was able to do, winning 4 games the first year, but then 5, and then getting over the hump. How impressive the '78 Eagles were. So they were the ones that really, it was like, man, I wanted to put them on here, but um, the one that really bumped them out was the '01 Patriots. They really were that like 5. They were the last one to make it for me. So it was hard.
Yeah, yeah. There was a couple, like, for me, like, also like the 2013 Chiefs, with Andy and Alex Smith, and they draft Kelsey that year. That was a good turnaround. '88 Bengals was another one that I was like, man, that was like a big time turnaround. And they
I kind of disagree with that one a lot of
Okay,
times.
let's
A
hear
lot of
that.
people put that. I think the '88 Bengals, '87 is so weird with that strike
Right, that's true.
that it's hard to judge a lot of the teams who I'm not saying that there weren't bad teams, but that strike throws off a lot of stuff with me. So, do I believe the Bengals turned things around? But do I think they would have been that bad if they had not a strike shortened season? I don't think so either. And I think that's where it's like misleading. Like they had that bad loss to the Niners that year where all they had to do was kneel the football and they
Yeah,
gave up they gave it the turnover on downs or whatever, and then Niners beat them, which is bad. But I just think the Bengals, like people overhype it because they 4 wins, but they were a talented bunch of guys that strike season. Like so, they didn't even
right,
all those losses aren't to them even. So I
right. Because
always
Boomer
disagree
Esiason
with
is
that.
still there. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like, and he's coming off the MVP season in '88. He's going to have a good season in '87. But yeah, I think I also too was looking at just the record and the bounce back off of that record. So that's a good point. I didn't even think about the shortened season either. Those were just a couple other teams that were like fringe. Like, all right, like let me look at this a little bit. But no, this was fun though, man. 'Cause I looked at some teams that I haven't looked at in a little while, so it was cool to like dive into some of this.
Yeah, it was fun and it was a good challenge because
Yeah,
not to be like, oh well, in a 3 year time they turned it. It's like nah, just gotta keep it to 1 year, 1 year. So that I gotta look at it like those Steelers like. Yeah, I look at what they did in '72, but they were building it. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. So like it's just a different thing. So it was a good like test to be like keep it to the 1 year as best as you can. And I think both our lists did a pretty good job of it. So this was a lot of fun. But we want to hear from the people.
yeah,
Please hit us up at Bigger Game Pod on Twitter/X. And so see if you agree with our list. Who do you guys think should be number one? I know it's gonna be a lot of 99 Rams.
yeah.
We'd love to debate you and tell you why you're wrong, especially Jose. Jose can't wait to debate you and say why you're so wrong. But we want to hear some great stories or great thoughts on 1 year NFL turnarounds. You can follow us on Instagram at Bigger Game Pod as well. And follow our YouTube channel, Bigger Than the Game Podcast with Deremy and Jose. So, Jose, this was fun, man. And
Yeah,
we're going to have some good content coming for you guys to finish out the rest of 2024. So please stay tuned for that. But for the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Jose Ruiz, I'm Jeremy Dove. Thank you guys for listening to Big in the Game with Deremy and Jose. Take care.
peace.